belief in God was absurd. But a trip to Paris in 1985 changed all that.
Honey, Howard?
Storm was diagnosed with a perforation in his small intestines. In a Paris hospital, Howard's condition weakened until, believing he was near death, he said goodbye to his wife and shortly after slipped into unconsciousness.
When I opened my eyes, I found myself standing next to the bed, and I thought, this is impossible, because just moments before I'd been dying. Then I saw Beverly, my wife, sitting in the chair opposite me on the other side of the bed, and I tried to talk to her, but she acted like she couldn't see me or hear me. No one could see me or hear me. And then I heard voices calling me from outside the room. These people outside the room were saying, hurry up, come with us. We've been waiting for you a long time. You've got to go now. And I thought they'd come to help me. I kept asking them who they were, but they just insisted that they had come for me, they had been waiting for me, and it was time to go with them. So I thought they were to take me to my operation, and I went with them.
We've been waiting. Howard, come with us.
We've been waiting.
They started to push and pull at me, yelling and screaming at me, and I fought back as hard as I could. There were dozens of them, maybe hundreds, thousands. There's no way to tell in that darkness, swarming all over me. The more I fought, the more vicious they became. To my horror, I realized that they were tearing me apart, consuming me. All of them were laughing and taunting me, and the more they hurt me, the better they liked it. As I lay there on the ground in a fetal position, trying to protect myself from their kicks and their taunting, I heard a voice say, pray to God. And I thought, I don't believe in God. How can I pray? And a second time it said, pray to God, and a third time. And it came out all mixed up with the 23rd Psalm and the Pledge of Allegiance and the Lord's Prayer, just little bits of them that I could remember. But the people around me hated any mention of God, and they were screaming at me. And in my desperation, I yelled out into the darkness, Jesus, please save me. And with that, a tiny light appeared in the darkness and became very bright. It was the most brilliant, beautiful light that lifted me up and filled me with ecstasy. And I knew absolutely that this was the Jesus that I'd believed in as a child. He took me out of that horrible place that I now know was hell, and we began to approach heaven. With Jesus and the angels that he called over to us, we went over my life from its beginning to the end, and I was so ashamed of the things that I had done in my life. But the important thing is I knew that God loved me, and Jesus and the angels loved me, in spite of the things that I had done. And eventually they told me that I had to come back into this world, which was almost unbearable to me to be separated from them. But I knew that through their love for me and my love for them, that I would never be separated from God or the heavenly beings or Jesus again.
Incredible as his experience sounds, Howard Storm remains convinced it was real. In fact, that experience brought about a radical change in Howard's life and transformed him from an unbelieving atheist to a committed believer. He credits that single event for causing a complete turnaround in his life.
I think the most important thing about near-death experiences is the way people's lives are changed. It has been studied by scientists that people who've had near-death experiences lose their fear of death. But more importantly, people who have had near-death experiences know that there is a governing love that rules the universe, and they want to be a part of it. And their lives are changed for the better to be a part of that love.
Based on Storm's experience, heaven's counterpart, hell, is equally real. But what of those whose experience is not as chilling as Howard Storm's? It's understandable that such a dramatic encounter with hell might change a person's life, but what happens to those who experience something entirely different? And one of the more famous near-death experiences, Danny and Brinkley also endured a life-altering encounter. Danny tells of his experience in complete detail in his book, Saved by the Light. But the basic facts are these. Danny was talking to a friend on the phone in the bedroom of his home in Aiken, South Carolina.
Look, I gotta go. No, I just don't like thunderstorms.
Danny had never been comfortable during thunderstorms, and he was anxious to get off the phone and get away from anything electric. Suddenly, there was an explosion in his ear. Danny was jerked out of his shoes and hurled back into the bed, his body shattered almost beyond recognition. Danny remembers leaving his body and watching as his wife, Sandy, tried to keep him alive with CPR. Once he dropped back into his tortured body, but not for long. Soon he was out again, watching the medical technicians desperately trying to save his life. As the ambulance began to pull away, Danny saw a number of amazing things. But let's have Danny describe the experience in his own words.
There was a sound of chimes as the tunnel spiraled toward me and then around me. Then all of a sudden there was no Sandy crying. There were no paramedics working on me. There was no ambulance radio chatter. There was just me and the tunnel. I looked ahead into the darkness. There was a light up there. I began to move toward it quickly as possible. I was moving without legs at a high rate of speed. Ahead the light became brighter and brighter until it overtook the darkness and it left me standing in a paradise of brilliant light. It was the brightest light I'd ever seen, but it was soothing to my eyes. I looked to my right and could see a silver form appearing like a silhouette through a mist. As it approached, I began to feel a deep sense of love that encompassed all the meanings of that word. It was as though I was seeing a lover, a mother, a best friend, and multiples 1,000-fold. This being engulfed me, and as it did, I began to experience my whole life, feeling and seeing everything that had ever happened to me.
Suddenly, Danny was back at the hospital, looking down at the frantic scene in the emergency room. The ambulance attendants had done their best to try and revive him, but they had given up. And now as he watched, the doctors finally gave up and pulled the sheet over his head, pronounced him dead, and pushed the gurney out into the hallway. The next stop for Danyan was the morgue. Then, perhaps the most frightening part of the whole experience. Suddenly, he was back in his body, under the sheet, looking up at it with tortured eyes. Danny couldn't move or even make a noise, and the orderlies were coming to take him to the morgue. What's more, now that he was back in his body, it seemed like even his thoughts caused him pain. He saw shadows through the sheet and hoped they would notice, because he did the only thing he could do. He blew on the sheet from underneath.
Hey, come here, he's alive. Look. Hey!
The body Danny came back to was horribly damaged. It would be months before he could move his arms or stand, let alone walk. But the experience would bring about a profound change in his life.
One of the most provocative points about the near-death experience is it begins to open up an understanding that there is a life after death. Not only is there a life after death, there is a system by which we leave this world to enter that one. And the more we study that, the greater the opportunity to lift the veil so that we know that there is not only this life, but a life after this one. From my personal experience, I know there's a life after death. Why? I've had 3 of these experiences, 1 death experience and 2 near-death experiences. Struck by lightning in 1975, declared clinically dead for 28 minutes. Collapsing of heart failure and having emergency open heart surgery in 1989. And then having to have emergency brain surgery in 1997. All complications from being struck by lightning. There is a life after death. a wondrous, glorious place that awaits us. The near-death experience begins